Hey to whoever's watching this, McVick family, nice to see you. Uh, Last week we sent out an announcement of where we're headed with the church. Layne gave us all the details, but we realized it kind of sounded like a press conference. Like we had a lot of information to give out, and so we thought it might be a cool idea to interview Layne and just get a little bit more behind the scenes look of what he's thinking, how he comes to these decisions, and just to give you uh, the realization that we're just people making these decisions, that we're human. And so I'm going to ask Layne some questions about his process, and he doesn't know the questions I'm going to ask. This is not staged, nothing like that. Yeah, just to give you guys a deeper dive into what we're doing during this time. Does that sound good, Layne?
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Okay. So before we jump into the real businessy questions, I just wanted to ask you, because people are dying to know, what kind of fun stuff have you and your family been doing during quarantine? Like, what do you guys do to stay entertained?
Well, you snuck up on us one night when you
Literally.
brought over a birthday cupcake. We were playing Monopoly. Trayton and Kerrigan and I have played a lot of Monopoly, like 40 games of Monopoly over the last couple of weeks.
40?
Yeah. We try to play every night when Trayton's not working and I'm home. We'll play 2 or 3 games some days, but
What?
yeah.
That game is like notorious for being like too long to finish.
Well,
What
we play
game?
pretty fast. I mean, it goes pretty quickly. So been doing a lot of reading.
Yeah.
Greta and I began watching The Crown, which we don't usually watch much TV together. I usually watch sports, and that's about it. We don't watch a lot of TV together, but we started watching The Crown. Yeah, doing a lot of reading, yard work when it's nice outside. That's pretty much. We did a hike the other day. We want to do more of that. It was nice to get outside. So I
Yeah.
think that's what we've been doing as a family. Last
Yeah.
couple of days, we've been enjoying having my daughter Bronte home. She's been home for several days from Nashville, so it's been
Yeah.
great to have her around.
Cool. Yeah, that's like one of my favorite questions to ask people, because every house is so different, you know? Like you have no idea what people are doing. And so
Yeah.
40 games of Monopoly, I haven't heard that one yet. So obviously you're not making decisions in a vacuum. That's never been the type of leader you are. You're all about teamwork. We do staff meetings all the time. So can you walk us through what your decision-making process has looked like during the COVID crisis? Like, who have you talked to? How do you come to a final decision? What does that process look like for you?
Sure. It really has been a collaborative effort. I've really appreciated discussions we've had as a staff. We've begun meeting twice a month via Zoom.
Twice a week.
Twice a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, twice a week during the COVID crisis, just to have more chances to connect, because we feel like there's a lot more we need to process and talk about. And their input's been really helpful. Our board has met several times, and we've discussed these kind of things. I tend to put things in writing and where I'm thinking and try to send it out to people. Prior to sending out last week's official communication, I had sent out a much longer, more rambling communication to our board, staff, and probably 10 to 15 other friends and confidants, just to get their feedback. It's also been really helpful during this season to be able to connect with local pastors. I've had a number of Zoom conversations with pastors in our network, and also with Brethren in Christ pastors and with Bishop Bob. So I feel like I've gotten input from a lot of different people, as well as watching a lot of videos and listening to podcasts, which I don't normally do. I prefer reading, but because of the immediacy of some of the things we're dealing with, I've started to do that several hours a week. So I feel like I've gotten a lot of input from those sources.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And can you give folks just like a deeper dive into our staff meetings a little bit? What do they look like? What do you value about them? And how do you kind of run those meetings?
They have been different during this COVID season. I've tried to keep us moving along more quickly than normal and have more of a written formal agenda, because I feel like there's so many things we have to talk about. Just checking in, working remotely, been checking in with our staff. Hey, how are you doing? Is the working arrangement that we currently have, is that working for you? How are you doing spiritually, ministry-wise? We've had chances to pray with each other. And then really just kind of walking through, how did last Sunday's service come off? What do we do well? What do we need to improve? Do we have details in place for next week? I think the importance of meeting twice a week has been heightened, just because you don't realize how, when you're working remotely, how much you need to talk to each other and just be able to see each other face to face. So, a lot of those logistical details, trying, I think, pretty much each time we meet to say, okay, what are next steps? What do we need to be thinking about? Which probably is, for me, the most challenging thing in this process has been feeling like there's a call for answers and a need for clarity. And yet, at times, new information changing by the hour. And so it's like people's desire and my desire to have something solid that we know we can look to and say, okay, at this point, we're going to do this. And yet realizing in some ways that's not possible. So trying to find that balance of communicating well and clearly, and yet really not knowing a lot. And I think that's where our staff's been really helpful for me, just being encouraging and supportive in their perspectives, and I think just really standing behind me as a leader in those decisions. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the cool things about your leadership is like I can see your wheels turning actually when people offer up opinions or perspectives that are different than where you entered the meeting. And to see you actually be like, okay, like considering people's opinions. I've worked under some leaders who just, they charge ahead no matter what because they've come up with the right solution, obviously, and it's cool to see us as a staff ebb and flow as the conversation goes, like genuinely listening to different perspectives and seeing where we come out. I think that's been really
Yeah. And it's pretty common to talk about generational differences, but I can't remember an era or an issue where I feel those differences more acutely. And so one of the things I really value from our staff, knowing that we have some younger staff, is just being able to get their perspectives, because I really do think generational differences and perspectives really come into play here in a pretty tangible way.
Yeah, for sure. You kind of touched on this already, but maybe just to reiterate it, what has been the hardest part about being the leader of a church specifically during this time? What have you felt is the hardest?
Um, I think the hardest part for me has been the realization that there aren't really answers that please everyone.
Mm,
And I'm getting a little emotional about that. I didn't expect to, but it's, we've walked through challenging staff transitions in the past. And even though people don't agree with those decisions, I've been able to say, you know what, just hang with me for a year or so. And I think we'll see, hopefully we'll see that we made a good decision, but we'll know. I feel like the challenge of this situation is there aren't really right answers.
yeah.
If you go through this and no one gets sick, then obviously you achieve that, and that's a great thing. But then you could always have people who say, yeah, well, we could have opened things up a lot earlier, or we could have relaxed things more. And so I think, again, getting back to kind of the generational differences as well, one of the challenging things is just the widely different perspectives and solutions, answers that people have. I think for me too, in part, and I've shared this with a few people, I think by nature, I'm not a fearful person and maybe tend to approach things more from a skeptical viewpoint when experts give me advice about things to do. That's
Yeah.
just kind of the way I'm wired. And so on a personal level, I don't really have much fear, maybe less than I should, about the coronavirus. But I feel like in my role as a leader, I'm required to have that concern for everybody and that responsibility for other people. And so I feel like I have this tension between how I would approach it personally and yet the responsibility I feel of how I need to approach it as a leader. So that's one of the things I think that's most difficult for me, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think about if, we're a church of 500 or whatever the number is, if we all had the same opinion on this, that would be very creepy. And that would be very strange, like, so clearly with that many people, we're going to have varying opinions and differences. And that, yeah.
There are days when I would take creepy. Because
Yeah,
it'd be nice if we all had the same opinions.
we have too many checks and balances. We're not going to get I won't let you get to creepy, I don't think. So on the flip side of that coin, what has been the most rewarding thing about being a leader of a church during this time?
I think I've read this early on and heard leaders talk about it, but an understanding that I've gained is that a crisis like this really shines a spotlight on reality. So if there's a lot of dysfunction and tension and conflict, and you go into a crisis like this, that's going to multiply.
Mm.
Conversely, if there's unity and health and strength, that's going to become very evident. I think one of the things that's been most gratifying to me is just seeing evidence of the health and strength and unity that McVick has. We've touched on the fact that we don't all agree. We have different perspectives, different generations, all of that. But I think it's been really gratifying for me to see people really come together and support. I so often have people telling me they're praying for me, they're praying for us, just offering their support, telling us how well they think we're doing in various things. And so that's really been gratifying. On another note, and I'll try not to go too far of a detour, you'll be hearing more about this soon, but we've been working with pastors in our community to develop a shared statement of how we'll approach our response to the coronavirus. We currently have 19 pastors that have signed on to that. Just yesterday, there were 9 or 10, and I was wondering whether we should can this idea. And we made some tweaks, and it's really been neat to see that come together. So another thing that's been really fun for me is to see pastors and churches really come together, both in, collecting food for New Hope and for the school district, but also in this combined pastor statement that we're going to be, well, I'll be showing that to you soon, but that's been a neat thing just to see. Several people have used the Bible verse from the story of Esther about for such a time as this. And I've had a number of pastors tell me the investments that I've made, the relationships that we've fostered over the past 3 years, they really sense are for such a time as this. So that's been pretty cool.
And that's awesome to just see like a community of people coming together. Obviously, there's going to be disagreements amongst churches too,
Yeah.
but the unity of leaders of a community coming together and saying, "Hey, this is unprecedented times. Let's try to help our people the best way we can
Yeah.
together."
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Um, so for the congregation, being apart and meeting in our homes was an interesting adjustment to make, and obviously many people have had a hard time doing that and really miss our communal meetings. But what about this shift do you feel like has been positive? Like what spiritual or practical lessons do you think we as a congregation can take away from this time of isolation and quarantine?
Um, yeah, I think a time like this really does help you sort through what's most important. And I think for McBick, we've often talked about being more of kind of an informal, organic, in some ways casual church that hasn't emphasized production and performance as much as we have kind of relationships.
Yeah.
So I think for me, in a lot of ways, what we've walked through has really solidified that in saying, okay, what are our values really? What are they really? When you strip away meeting for worship together on a Sunday morning, what what's left?
Yeah.
And so I think it's reinforced for me some of what I feel are really key commitments that McBick has, and I think ways of leading and doing church, if you will, that are important to us as a staff. So I think it's been good to kind of reinforce some of those things, and just help us think through what does matter most, what's important. I think for me personally, and people are probably feeling this on a variety of levels, um, just the need to rely on God during this time. When you have things taken away that you're used to relying on, you kind of get a glimpse into seeing, okay, there's health in some of those things, but there's also a reliance on some of those that is unhealthy. And a situation like this kind of helps strip that away and really force us back to God and say, okay, God, what of my life is kind of out of kilter? I'm not making any commitments to give this up or to cut back significantly, but I've realized how much time I spend watching sports. The time I have in the evenings, the time that I get to play Monopoly with the kids, to watch shows with Greta, to read. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of time I spent watching sports. So that's just one example, but I think it's a good time to kind of reconsider what our values are and how we spend our time.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I always say like when when you're in a season of change where things are abnormal to you, that's where we learn the most about ourselves. Like it's
Hmm.
just forced upon us almost if you're willing to look for it. And so
Yeah.
to be able to like see that in your personal life is really cool. And then also as a church, like what are we learning about ourselves in this big change as as for us as a congregation, who are we and what are we learning? That's cool.
Well, and if I can, and I just had a conversation with John King about 10 minutes ago about this, but I think one of the things we're trying to discern as a staff is how do you tell when somebody has a genuine need that needs to be addressed in a new way, as opposed to somebody maybe who has some unhealthy preoccupations with something that this time is actually good to strip away,
Mm,
because those things can both look the same
yeah.
at first blush.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations John and I were just having, like, how do we minister to the recovery community at this time?
Hmm.
um, we all need community,
Yeah.
but there are people that are floundering, not having it. Can we provide some things for them that allow them to move toward health in a way that maybe isn't necessary for most people?
Yeah.
And how do we discern between those? So a little bit of a tangent there, but I think that's something fresh that I'm wrestling with.
Yeah, and that's so good for us personally, like finding the difference between a want and a need.
Hmm.
Or just
Yeah.
like, like what are the things that are stripped away that we just missed because we were so used to it? And how do we rebuild the blocks of our life? Is it going to look completely like, are we going to go back to normal? I've heard a lot of people talking about that. Is our
Yeah.
goal like,
Yeah.
are we going back to normal as church? Or going back to normal as a human being? Or am I rebuilding kind of this new normal that has some new parts of me in it that I didn't know were there?
Yeah.
It's to me it's an exciting time. But I say that out of privilege, because I haven't been affected by the sickness and I haven't been financially affected, so I'm speaking from a place of privilege, but because I have that privilege, I want to investigate, who I am in that time and what is really important, what are my values and priorities. And
So let me make an analogy, and a number of us on our staff and church board as well, and some prayer partners of mine are fasting today because we really sense the need to just be able to quiet our hearts and say, God, what do you have to speak to us in this time? What direction do you have for us? And when you were talking, it just reminded me of my experience with fasting. There are some people who fast and in the middle of it say how much they love fasting. I hate fasting. However, I like what happens after I fast. I rarely come out of a time of fasting and say, man, that was really great. I do it because I know I need to, but it's often after the fact that God shows me the importance of it and what he wanted me to learn. And I think that's the way I'm approaching this coronavirus too. Unlike you, it's hard for me to sit here in the middle of this and say, this is really good. This is what I'm learning. This is what,
yeah.
but I know that after the fact, I know God is at work. And I know that after the fact, there will be light bulbs that click for me and things that I learn. So I think there might be a parallel there, maybe in how different people approach
Yeah.
fasting or
Yeah.
learning styles or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. You and I are pretty different, right?
Yeah, we are.
In some ways. Cool. I got one more question for you, and this might be honestly the most important one. That's why I wanted to end with it. But when you spend time in prayer and really listen to the Lord, what do you feel like He is saying about this crisis and about our church? What kind of things are you hearing from Him?
Yeah, that's good. Again, I was just having a conversation about that with John a few moments ago in the context of that other issue I raised.
He was prepping you for this interview. He was helping.
Apparently, yeah. Did he know the questions you were going to ask me? um, so, and today I'm fasting breakfast and lunch. I've been thinking about this a lot since staff meeting yesterday, but the word that I'm getting so far, and I look forward to hearing from other staff members tomorrow. But I just feel like God has been telling me, um, you're walking a good path. You're getting input from people. You're doing the things you need to do. I don't feel like God's giving me clear answers about what that is. I joked with our staff yesterday and said, I'd love if somebody came up to me and handed me a sheet and said, hey, God told me we're supposed to do this. Now, maybe a lot of people will have notes for me from God soon. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I feel like my sense is that God's kind of affirming the process that we're in of making decisions, not so much that he has a radical new direction for me or information per se. Again, that might change over the next couple hours. That might change as we as a staff meet tomorrow and say, hey, what did God, what was God saying to you? There may be things that kind of rise up and we're like, yeah, that's clearly God. But so I don't know how clearly that answers your question, but that's kind of where I feel like I've been at. Yesterday, kind of in our staff meeting, what sparked this time of fasting, Katie had shared from 2 Chronicles 20, the story of Jehoshaphat, who was being besieged by armies from a number of various ites, Ammonites. I don't remember all of them. I read it again this morning, but don't remember all the ites.
Yeah.
But he basically comes before God and says, Lord, we don't know what to do. Our eyes are on you. And there's a whole story there that I'd encourage you to read in 2 Chronicles 20. But God then sends a prophet who basically says, the battle is not yours, it's the Lord's. And I think that's really been impacting me. God, we don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you.
Yeah.
And then God's response of, the battle is not yours, it's his. And I think as a leader, it's easy for me to lose sight of that and to respond as if the battle is mine, and to take that personally, and to to react to differences of opinion, criticism, whatever. And I think through this time so far, God's just been reinforcing that truth. The battle's mine, it's not yours. And my prayer back to him again, okay, God, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So still hoping for more clarity, but that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, sometimes we're in the waiting of like, what I'm hearing from God is to keep hearing from God. It's like, it's not quite enough at the moment, but yeah, I think that's an amazing word. And yeah, I just remember yesterday in staff meeting how powerful that word from Katie was. And that's the power of scripture sometimes. Like, it speaks directly to our situation. And if we as a 11-person staff keep our eyes on the Lord, if we as a 500-person congregation keep our eyes on the Lord, like, we can't falter really. We can't make a blunder so big that we're off his path. Like, we just need to keep with him. So I really appreciate you being willing to be recorded, and just I hope that people can kind of see your heart behind everything, and also just see how your mind works. I mean, I love that I get that in staff meeting, that I can see how the wheels are clicking and all of us are working together to come to these decisions. So I hope that to any of you guys who are watching and wanting to know more about how are we doing this, it's not an easy thing, and it's not rash decisions. There's no one right answer,
Right.
We're trying to hear from the Lord, see what he's got. So thanks, Layne. I really appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being willing to interview me. When I thought about doing this just as a way to, again, kind of give people an inside look, I thought you'd be a great person to be the interviewer, and you did that well. Thanks.
And if we go viral, if we just get millions of views on this video, maybe we'll just have to start a side business. Okay, part 2, part 3. All right.
I'm looking for more to do right now.
All right, thanks, Layne.
Hey, thank you.